Hello, my name is Neil Bleiweiss. This is a distance education research review. In this review, I will be comparing two different articles on distance education. Article 1 is exploring the complex relations between achievement emotions and self-regulated learning behaviors in online learning from Martino Jr. and Jones II. Article 2, does psychological capital and social support impact engagement and burnout in online distance learning students from Barrett and Duran? And then it will follow with a comparison, final reflections, and thoughts. Martino Jr. and Jones II's primary study on achievement emotions and self-regulated learning behaviors in 2012 aimed to bridge the gap between online learning research and achievement emotions research. This study's theoretical framework is based around control value theory, in which achievement emotions are discrete emotions experienced by students during specific academic or achievement-related activities. With this theory, the study approaches the valence or the relation of positive and negative emotions with their level of activation or deactivation to examine the reciprocal nature between both as they apply to self-regulated learning strategies. The primary hypotheses and research questions of this study were that enjoyment, which is a positive activating emotion, would positively predict elaboration and metacognition in an online course, but that boredom, which is considered negative deactivating emotion, would negatively predict both of these behaviors. Additionally, it was hypothesized that frustration, which is a negative activating emotion, would negatively predict elaboration, but positively predict metacognition. Method of this study: a sample size of 302 undergraduate students at a U.S. service academy was used, consisting of 221 men, 78 women, and 3 students who did not disclose a gender on their survey, with an average age of around 20 and a half or 20.5 years old. The students were all provided with a 2.5-hour self-paced online course in aviation physiology to complete prior to attending an in-person training course in the same study area. In the online course, students completed 4 40-minute lessons with different media, completing each lesson with a short quiz. If students failed the quiz, they had to redo the lesson and retake the quiz before moving forward. Following the completion of the course and prior to the in-person training, students were offered an anonymous survey for self-reporting, which 100% of the students completed. The survey assessed 7 subscales under cognitive appraisals, achievement emotions, and self-regulated learning behaviors. The results were then compiled and run through a series of regression analyses to review the data. In the research, after conducting regression analyses of the 7 subscales, some of the key findings were as follows. Boredom and frustration were both statistically significant related to each other and to elaboration and metacognition. Enjoyment was positively related to elaboration and metacognition. Boredom was a significant negative predictor of elaboration and metacognition, but frustration served as a positive predictor of metacognition in that students who were more frustrated during the course identified in their survey that they put more effort into metacognitive strategies to learn. Based on the data collected, it was determined that distance learning enjoyment and task value had the strongest correlations with adaptive self-regulating learning behaviors, similarly to that of in-person learning. Some strengths of this study are as follows. The study assessed a population who can be heavily impacted by distance learning versus traditional education, especially in that they completed an online module prior to their in-person training. It provides informative data for instructional designers and for educators who are planning distance learning coursework, and also highlights the benefits of achievement emotions in structuring online learning environments. Some limitations were that it did assess a small sample size from a highly specialized educational population, and these results may not be transferable to all educational populations. Additionally, more focused on correlational data, and it did not provide concrete enough information or data to really influence causality information for future manipulation of circumstances to impact different educational outcomes. In the second study from Barrett and Duran from 2021, there was a focus on the role of psychological capital, or PsyCap, and social support on student engagement and burnout in distance learning. Psychological capital, PsyCap, refers to self-efficacy, hope, optimism, and resilience, while social support refers to the different resources to help a recipient of said support cope with stressful events. In this study, the main research questions were that PsyCap will negatively associate and predict student burnout, PsyCap will positively associate and predict student engagement, social support will moderate the PsyCap burnout relationship, whereby high support or high social support will buffer the relationship, social support will moderate the PsyCap engagement relationship, whereby high social support will enhance the relationship, and burnout will negatively be associated with engagement. The primary theoretical framework in this study is derived from positive psychology as it specifically applies to education. The methodology of this study utilized a sample size of 465 participants in postgraduate online coursework at a university in England consisting of 43% of male participants, 56% of female participants, and 1% of participants who did not disclose a gender on their survey, with an average age of 38.01 years old. These students also all worked full-time in addition to their part-time studies. The students were provided an online survey addressing some demographic information and then using Likert scale questions to address psychological capital, engagement, burnout, and social support. Following completion of the surveys, their data analysis proceeded in 3 stages: correlation assessment of the variables, hierarchical linear regressions, and moderation analysis to review the role of social support in comparison to the other factors. The key findings of this study were as follows. Age and psychological capital were statistically significant predictors of burnout. Additionally, psychological capital was the only factor statistically significant in predicting engagement of students. Social support did not significantly moderate the relationship between psychological capital and burnout, but it did moderate the relationship between psychological capital and engagement, in that students with low perception of social support and lower psychological capital yield lower engagement, whereas having high psychological capital yields high engagement regardless of low social support. Some strengths of this study include that it assessed a population who were entirely utilizing distance education, and also addressing students who are working and utilizing distance education and their relationship between those factors. Some limitations include that the data may be different when assessing undergraduate students in comparison to postgraduate learners. It also did not include any retention rate data of students as they maintain their retention from year to year within their programs. And also the research was conducted during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, which may have had a significant impact on the burnout and engagement of students as they completed the surveys. In a comparison of both articles, some similarities include that both assessed a collegiate population, and both addressed emotions related to academic success and learning behaviors, such as enjoyment, boredom, frustration, burnout, and engagement. Additionally, both articles had similar outcomes. Positive emotion correlated to better learning behaviors, similarly to how psychological capital, which includes positive emotions such as hope and optimism, and higher social support have a heavy positive correlation to lower burnout and higher engagement. However, the first article did have a smaller sample size with a more specialized population, whereas the second article had a slightly larger sample size with a broader population in age and with students who were working full-time in addition to pursuing their studies. Final reflections and thoughts regarding Article 1. Research in this primary study was significantly guided by the control value theory and previous research in distance learning. This research does provide data consistent with the control value theory. The research was rigorous in methodology, but could have been expanded to include all 4 grade levels or been expanded to include at least 1 additional institution. The conclusions are warranted based on the data included and informs future distance education that it is important to consider the role of emotions, such as enjoyment, boredom, and frustration in relation to distance learning and learning behaviors. This research also provides groundwork for duplication or modification of similar studies to be conducted now in a time when distance learning is much more prominent. Final reflections and thoughts on Article 2. Research in this primary study was based in positive psychology pertaining to the field of education. This study could have been tied more closely to theories of distance learning education, such as theory of transactional distance, to provide an additional dimension to the research and impact of social support as it pertains to learning autonomy. The research was rigorous in methodology, but could have been expanded to include undergraduate students as well, or been expanded to include at least 1 additional institution. The conclusions are warranted based on the data included and informs future distance education that the capacity of students to actively engage in their learning process can be significantly impacted by the availability of psychological capital. Additionally, providing social support for students can help them to better engage.